All right, good evening, everyone. For those who are joining, we do have 4 attendees. This is a policy subcommittee meeting. We're going to be dealing with several policies this evening, and we are hoping to try to get them approved in time for the start of the school year. These policies pertain to COVID-19 as well as remote learning. They are broadly written intentionally in order to encompass the variety of possibilities for what the confirmed plans might be that we end up voting on during any type of emergency that could come up during the pandemic. Now, first on our agenda item for the evening is to approve the minutes of June 15th. Do we have a motion on that? Has everyone had a chance to review them?
I have had a chance to review them. They looked okay to me. I will make a motion.
Okay. I'll second. So Jennifer?
Yep. Yes.
Andy?
Abstain.
And I vote yes. Minutes are approved. Okay, next we're going to discuss the policy on COVID-related issues. So I utilized the MASC proposed policy, and from there I made some revisions to it. I hope that you've had an opportunity to review them, and I'd like to know your thoughts. So do you want to start, Andy?
Sure. I had one general question, which is in several places, things are supposed to expire when the governor's declared emergency does. And I'm wondering whether we should, do we want to tie everything to a declaration by the governor? If there's some leeway for the school committee to, advance the date or retard it if needed, because there are certain things we don't necessarily want to just end just because the governor says we're no longer in an emergency.
Yes.
Like things like reassignments. I think there's so many items that I don't remember exactly which ones they are, but there are a few where I just thought, well, yeah, like the revising job descriptions for district staff. We don't want the revised job description to necessarily revert as soon as the governor says the emergency is over, right? We might want it to stay in force until the end of the semester or whatever. So there are several places like that. So I don't know so I don't know what form of words would be best to cover this. Like we want it to be able to both terminate it early or extend it a little bit, depending on circumstances.
Okay, so there could be some type of language that's saying that we will be mindful of the governor's declarations, but that ultimately it will be a school committee and superintendent decision.
Yeah, if we can usurp that power, that would be great.
Okay. Jennifer, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I like that. I think that we should say, taking that information into as consultation, but I think that if we as a school committee can reflect on what's appropriate for our district and hold on to that, I think that's a good idea. So I have some other comments. Can we go through them if I tell you where we are in the document?
Sure.
So I'm on the second page at the top. It says the school committee will vote. We've already done this, but I guess this is, so I wasn't really sure how that played into our policy. I guess we're setting a policy for this time period and we need to have it on record, I guess. I just wasn't sure how we would deal with that.
So the goal for this policy, at least the way I am seeing it, is in the future, whenever we have a situation where we might go into remote, we would have this policy in place to help guide us in how we're supposed to act as a school committee. So even though we already took that vote, this policy is not just about the vote we took, but about any future votes that this school committee or other school committees might end up taking.
Right, and so that I thought was really clear for me in the remote learning policy, which is separate from this, and this one's specific to COVID related issues, and it's a general interim policy. So I just wanted us to sort of think about, I mean, I'm fine with including it because we'll vote on any changes and we'll, that rests with the school committee. So when I was reading it, it was one of my notes. The fourth paragraph down, it says the back to school plan shall constitute the policy of the PSB. And I was trying to understand, because we have such a division about policy and procedure, how the plan then becomes a policy, because it almost makes it seem like procedure is becoming policy. So I just wanted us to think a little bit about that. I didn't really care for that particular language. I thought it was a little unclear, but I could, you know, if someone wanted to walk me through the thought process, I might understand that better. Under the first bullet, general district goals affected by the pandemic, it says the superintendent, with the advice and consent of school committee, may suspend or modify individual district policies. And I was trying to figure out why we would have the superintendent modify our policies instead of us modifying it, like as in the superintendent requesting a change to us. It just seemed like we were giving away a lot of policy power. And maybe there's a really good reason to do that in this situation, because maybe it's faster. I don't know. It just seemed like I was uncomfortable with that being an overarching rule that the superintendent, I mean, it says with the advice and consent, but is that the same as our vote? I don't know.
It's supposed to be, but if you would like that to be explicitly stated, then we can say with a school committee vote.
I just felt like we were giving away a lot there. It's one of the few things that we have. There are policies, and so to let someone else change them, I don't know.
So I could make that explicitly state with a school committee vote.
Okay. I think that would be fair.
Jennifer, so back to your previous question, could you explain this difference between policy and procedure that you mentioned? I'm new on this subcommittee, so I'd like to. Yeah,
you know, this is something that actually Michael Glover talked a lot about, and it's actually something that we've had at MASC trainings recently and last year. And this idea that school committee sets policy and the management and the school department create the procedures and protocols to implement these policies. And so we try to be careful when we're coming up with a policy that we don't go too far into procedures, so that, I mean, I think that's it, that we're trying to create a policy, the big idea, the overarching ideas, and the actual implementation and the procedures of the exact details of how that's going to happen and those protocols happen at the district level. Mm-hmm. That's how it's been explained to us in trainings. And so I was just concerned when a plan becomes policy. I feel like it's a little unclear how the plan can be the policy if we're separating procedures. The
level of detail at which, for example, the draft harassment complaint procedures are set out, like are we into a red zone there? I mean, because that gets in the weeds, right? Like saying things have to happen within a certain number of days, that sort of thing.
Well, we have done that. We have decided in times that that's part of the policy. It's school committee policy. I think like with the code of conduct, I think we had some time, maybe, I don't know, Casey could probably remind me better. I think that there have been times where we've given timelines. I think we did a little bit of that with the student activities policy or the field trip policy. We've set some timelines, but we've not gone into the level of detail into like exactly when staff will do it, how they will do it, what exactly they will do. I think that's where, once it gets into like the really detailed steps of dictating how things will be exactly implemented. David, you're the chair. You probably should answer this question, but I jumped in.
Oh, I think you're answering it very well. Go ahead.
So okay. That's my understanding of the division between policy and procedure, which is why I was just a little concerned at the language that the plan would become policy. So I don't know if there's a way we can adjust the language to really reflect what it is that we want or we're intending to say. Maybe that the plan informs the policy, or I'm not really sure. Do we need to have that in there at all, or is it really important? And David, I would look to you for input on that.
I could take it out. I don't really have strong feelings on it one way or the other. That I think was in the original MASC version, so I tried not to diverge from it too much, but we could definitely soften that language so that it's the plan that informs the policy if we're concerned about getting too detailed.
Yeah, I mean, just just because I know we try to keep that division, and I was just trying to be mindful of that when I went in. So it maybe informs, might make it better. Sorry, so I think the next one that the next comment that I had after sort of with the vote or the school, policy subcommittee or school committee voting is on the next thing I have is under, is a minor detail. So I'm trying to be helpful, not nitpicky. There's 2 bullets under school calendar. And I think we just want to delete the bullet point for where it says subject to the guidance. And then I did have a question on class size. I just worry about class size getting too big, and I think that it's clear that that's not the will of the school committee. That we support small class sizes, but there's been a lot of conversation around kindergarten class size lately, and so I just is class size our policy? That's, I guess, my question. Is class size a school committee policy or just a procedure of the district?
We do have a policy that addresses class size. It's not super detailed, but explains our philosophy behind class sizes. So that's in there currently.
So I just wasn't sure how folks felt about the ability to change class size and what that might mean, like what the implications of that might be.
I mean, I think you're hinting at it, Jennifer, but the implications are huge, especially given how political or how polarizing the topic was last year, and even now to some extent in negotiations.
So I got really nervous when I just put a big K question mark there. I don't know where the school committee will fall. I mean, this is something we can discuss with the larger committee as well, where people will be on, deviating from our existing policy on class size. I mean, I'm okay with smaller. I'm not okay with bigger.
Why would we ever go to bigger classes in order to maintain healthy, safe, and effective classrooms during a pandemic?
I don't know. I'm just trying to think of all the angles of how this might play out. That's what I've learned on policy is you've got to think about like how it could go in any direction.
So Casey seems
No, I appreciate it. Yeah. So Andy, I can tell you one thing that we're grappling with like in real time is at one of our schools, I think we have a 3 or 4 section school where a 3rd grade has, after we remove students who are in the remote learning academy, we have an enrollment of 10, 11, and 11, which makes for 32 kids. Mm-hmm. And so if we are looking to staff the remote learning academy, ideally we could take one of those classroom teachers, consolidate the 2 and have a class of 16 and 16, mm-hmm. and so that we avoid having to hire a staff member. So that would be an example.
Okay. Would something like that run afoul of our existing class size policy?
I don't know, David, you probably have the language in front of you, so I don't know where that would stand. It seemed like, I mean, we were talking about it with Jim and the principals, and it seemed like it was a doable thing.
I don't think
Not that it would go.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be a problem with the class, because class size, I think, is like 21 or 22, or something like that. I don't know if the actual numbers are in there, David, in the policy, but it's been the goal to keep it at a certain level. But having 15 in one classroom, where most classrooms we'd like to probably keep them smaller than that, that's a lot of bodies in one room.
True.
Well,
but if you're filling
hybrid, of course, so we're not getting all those bodies into one room. So.
Sure. No, are you saying that it would be 16 and then you would split them 8 and 8?
When we're in the hybrid.
Once you go into hybrid, you would go 8 and 8?
Correct. But once we go full remote, assuming that we could once we go full in, the assumption is that we can guarantee health and safety at that point. So we could fit 16 in a room.
Right. Because we can already fit over 20.
Right.
I mean, but yes, assuming that the health and safety metrics are there.
Right. But we will have had to have increased class size to get there, if that makes sense.
Tell me more. I got confused.
So I think what this group was talking about was whether or not we could increase class size. And I think Andy's question was, when would we want to do that during a time of like a pandemic anyways? And I gave the example that if we have to consolidate sections, we would have to increase class sizes to start, because then we would go into remote where we would split the 16 anyways. But then at some point, what would have been a class of 10 kids actually in the beginning moved to 16.
Okay. All right. I think I'm okay with this.
And again, it does say.
I don't know. I just, oh. Maybe
It says with the advice and consent of the school committee. So it's not like somebody could go rogue and suddenly increase class size to 50. So I'm personally not too worried about it, but I don't know how you feel, Andy.
As long as advice and consent means what it does in the Senate, where you actually have to take a vote.
If we would to, if the two of you would like for that to be written very explicitly with school committee votes, I'm perfectly fine putting in that language.
So the next one I had was under attendance, and it was more, I have a question there. It says, subject to operative law and regulations, the superintendent may suspend, modify, or adapt procedures related to student attendance and accommodations for students requiring special placements. Can someone, is there anybody who could tell me more about what that means in that sentence?
So
It was
this
the
comes,
accommodations for students requiring special placements paired with attendance that I was confused about. Like, why is that specifically in there under attendance? Does anybody know?
so that comes straight from the MASC. My guess would be that it's students who require special placements should be treated differently from general education students for purposes of taking attendance. That would be my guess. But Casey, do you have further insight into that?
I don't. You're saying that it's referencing special ed kids?
Well, just the part about accommodations for
place-
students requiring special placements.
I just don't know what that means, like why it's attached in this. I mean, I understand, David, that it came from MASC. Like, I understand that part. I just was confused about because it doesn't say attendance for students requiring special
Right.
placements, it says accommodations. I wasn't
But
sure.
it's under attendance?
Yeah.
I mean, it could be the case that, a certain student has, attendance is an issue. And Maria, let me know if I'm like way off elsewhere now. But that there would be a reason why the attendance policy wouldn't apply to that student that's disability related. It just doesn't read to me that way though, because that's always, regardless whether we're in a pandemic or not, that should be allowed for.
I mean, couldn't we I just don't know why that's there. And because it says accommodations, that makes me nervous. Could we just take out that part and then we're talking about all students. So students in other placements, they're all our students, right?
Okay, I have no problem taking that out. What about you, Andy?
Sorry, Jen, you just want not to mention that the superintendent can suspend accommodations at will.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to take out the last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 words, I think.
Right, just ending
make
it
it
at
public attendance.
is related to student attendance.
Yeah, is that okay? I mean, and whatever the superintendent needs to, I mean, I don't like the word accommodations mixed up in there. I don't
Mhm.
So
like
you said the last 5 words, but the accommodations is the 6th to last word.
6 words. 6 words.
6 words. Oh, okay. Yeah, that seems fine.
I do teach math. I can count. Sorry. Not so good. Sorry, tonight. Then my other one was on time on learning. I'm sorry. I'll try to be quick. Time on learning is the next bullet point, and I just wondered if we could put in something about approval of school committee in here, like consent or advice and consent or approval of school committee. If we're going to change our minutes, which we may need to do, and I totally get that. I'm thinking I just want to make sure that's science and social, and I'm not saying that anybody wants to do this. I'm just playing the field here and saying, I don't want anything to happen to sort of we talked a lot about science and social studies minutes, and I just want to make sure that all of our core academic subjects and, our great programs don't get, cut more than they need to. So if there's some significant changes to time on learning, I think we should know about that.
Completely agree.
So on the next page, again, David, this is just a double bullet point under special education. And actually, maybe Casey, you could answer this. It says the superintendent and school committee shall be mindful that attainment of a high school diploma may render certain students ineligible for further services. Trying to figure out why that's in here. Can someone tell me more about why that announcement? I mean, we know that, but how does COVID, or why is that in there? Does anyone know, why the discussion of a diploma?
It may be the case that if you have a senior, let's say during another pandemic, we're not able to deliver all of our services as written on an IEP, and DESE says again, services will look different, and it may not look like it does on an IEP, and that's okay. A parent, I'm guessing if it's coming from MASC, it's got that sort of perspective, right? Where I think it's less parent oriented or student oriented. And I think what it might be saying is we can still graduate a student even if we didn't fulfill all the IEP minutes as written on an IEP or fulfill all of the students' goals. That's how that reads to me.
So is that something we want in our policy?
Can you read it to me again?
Yeah, the superintendent and school committee shall be mindful that attainment of a high school diploma may render certain students ineligible for further services. So, I mean, I think it does mean what you're saying, which is the facts are that once students graduate and they get their diploma, they don't receive services. So some students are eligible to continue past to a certain age in programs depending on need. And so I'm assuming it's talking about that, or do families have a right to say, we don't want the diploma because we haven't met the goals?
Yeah, we've had families do that. I mean, it's few and far between. I think I maybe get one a year, if that, where families say, my student's not ready to graduate. And it's a hard bar to meet.
Right.
For parents. I do like the wording where the school committee is to be mindful, but it doesn't put us in a tough position and still allows for some flexibility to take into account case by case basis.
Mindful, I'm okay. I don't see that this is a line in the sand. I think this is just something thinking about that, just to be aware of, and for families and staff to be aware that we need to be thoughtful about that in the pandemic.
I think the pandemic piece is, go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, well, I'm still a little puzzled as to why this is in a list of COVID-related policies. So it's that you were saying, Casey, that we might not be able to deliver the services in the way that we envisioned, and we don't want to forcibly graduate students who might, otherwise continue to benefit from services, or. Yeah.
Right. But I think some schools, some districts might look at it as, we don't want to have to continue paying for services either through staffing or contracted services for a student who we could graduate and no longer be responsible for.
Okay.
But in my time here, parents are pretty stoked when their kids can graduate. And the one case that we have a year, I mean, it's hard for the parent, but if I can review the cases quickly right now, we've allowed the kid to go to summer school past the graduation date so that they can get the credits or work on whatever it is that they need to, and then they get a diploma in December.
Any other questions about that item, or should I go on to the next one? The next bullet that I had, David, was discipline and suspension / expulsion with homeschooling rights. And then when I read the details of that, I think there's just an error in the title of it. Not your error, but MASC. I think maybe it should be, and maybe I misunderstand it, but I think it's discipline and suspension, expulsion, comma, and then take out the with, and it's like homeschooling rights. I don't know why these two things are connected here, because part of it talks about the rights of students who may be disciplined or who may elect to remain at home because of homeschooling, or who elect remote learning. So it's not necessarily that kids who have been disciplined have homeschooling rights. It's like, I just think that title doesn't really reflect what the paragraph is about. I mean, it starts out talking about discipline and suspension and making sure that kids who have some sort of discipline like that they're being educated, which I think makes sense. And then the second paragraph talks about how there needs to be a provision for students who are disciplined or suspended, students who are, I don't know why homeschooling is in here, because once families elect homeschooling, they're not part of PSB anymore. So I don't understand why that line's in here. But I also think we should keep in the part about students who elect remote learning for health and safety concerns. I just felt that I didn't like the title. I didn't think it made sense.
So Jennifer, should we just remove the whole clause about homeschooling from the main body as well?
Yeah,
if indeed we have because they're not part of PSB, they're not covered by our policies.
They're covered by the homeschool policy, I think. You're homeschooling. I think there's a whole homeschool, there's a whole set of procedures for homeschooling, and a whole set of like rules and laws.
Okay.
With that.
Is that something that where we need to require the superintendent to say something about them in their back to school plan? That's what this is about.
So the one potential area of intersectionality would be around homeschool students who are involved in athletics. So some districts do allow homeschool students to participate in athletics. And if there were some issue that were to arise between a homeschool student and a student in a traditional within our school program, and you wanted to discipline them, then maybe there would be application. But other than that scenario, I do see your point.
I mean, I think it's fine to keep it in if we're that's really a separate bullet, which is the superintendent shall include these things in the back to school plan, which is separate. I don't know, maybe it's not separate from making sure that in the plan, there's something for students who are being disciplined and are perhaps in a hybrid model, for example, are at home, and we need to make sure that they're being educated. I think it might just be a problem with the title of that bullet point. I don't know, or maybe it's two different bullet points, David.
I think another way could be to eliminate the second paragraph in the body of that entirely. Because if this is really about students who are being disciplined, I'm not sure why it then talks about students more broadly, perhaps, who elect to remain at home, or those who want to be at home in the interests of health and safety. It seems like two different categories, to your point. So perhaps we don't really even need that in at all.
Well, I mean, I like that is there some other place where it dictates that the superintendent has to include all of those different avenues for education in the back to school plan, or is this maybe the document where it spells that out? In which case, I think it just needs another title, which is, I don't know. I'm not sure. Sorry,
I think we could just separate that out, create a different bullet point for that.
Yeah.
I'm fine with that. I mean, I don't mind. I'm not trying to take any of the, necessarily the language out or the ideas. It's just, I think that it's confusing with that title. So I think we just have to clarify what it is that we're trying to get at there.
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to move down under two more bullets down under job description. We just have a double bullet point there. I think we need to take out, and then under.
I think, sorry to interrupt. This is the one where I think it's most important for us not to simply let it expire whenever the governor ends the emergency. Like at the end of the paragraph, there has to be some discretion on our part, because someone may need to keep doing their new job through the end of the school year or the end of the semester.
Oh, I see where you want it. Yeah, maybe
Right.
we can change that last sentence there.
Okay. Subject to school committee vote, something like that.
Yeah, or in collaboration with the, I don't know, the end of, I don't know what the right, we could maybe wordsmith that later, or, just sort of something about school committee input on when that timeline might be. And then actually, it's the same thing with students at risk. I wanted to add, because there are a number of them up above that talk about, you know, with the consent of school committee, I think we need to put that in here with students at risk. Because it's talking about revising or suspending provisions of policy, and that's our area. So I just think we should put some language in about school committee approval there. The next thing is under privacy of students, and it's actually a comment for staff, I think. It talks about not being able to record students in this as policy. And so I just want to make sure that that staff let other staff know that, like, teachers could be recorded, but in this, it's the privacy of students participating in online classes shall not be violated by recording them without appropriate permissions. So I just think that I just wanted to sort of highlight that for staff to sort of pass that on, so that that educators and other faculty know that we have to get permission before we record students. I'm not sure who that goes to, so I'll just throw it out there. Is that something, Casey, you guys could pass on, or Erin? Or maybe Michelle Herman can PD that.
Sorry, Jennifer, I was in and out. Can you just say that one more time about what it's referencing? Sure. About recording?
Yep. So it says, during periods of remote learning, the privacy of students participating in online classes shall not be violated by recording them without appropriate permissions, which is to say, if you got all the parents' permissions, you could record the whole Zoom meeting and post it. But if we don't have the permissions, and sometimes I know that's just tricky to kind of get a hold of, you know, it's hard to get sometimes the list of who's given permission and not. I'm sure you have to probably pull that out of like Aspen or another program, just to let staff know that, just to be mindful of that. You know, it's just to pass that on. I just don't want that to fall through as like a sort of procedural thing.
Yeah, definitely. We can pass that, or I can pass that to Michelle or to Scott Moore. He's gonna communicate a lot of information around technology use, I would imagine, in the upcoming week or so to staff or families. And the other thing that we could do, I mean, you alluded to this, that it's kind of hard to actually get this information sometimes, but we do at the beginning of the school year, really right before the school year starts, ask families to update all of their consents. And so we could add that as one of them, if necessary.
Yeah, and I think it's on the, I remember when I did update, you know, when you had to choose, you had to choose a model, you could update your records at that time. In the portal. And so one of the options is, you know, whether or not you want to opt in or out of, I think, of media, I think is.
That's it. That's exactly it.
So, and I just to like let staff know, maybe Scott can kind of let people know how to access that, you know, like a set of procedures for how to do that. And anyways, however that gets done, it was a note that I was like, oh, people will need to know about this in this policy. It may be different. Under public safety officers, David, we just have a double bullet point there. It's minor editing. And then the same thing under visitors in school buildings, just double. And my last change on this, and I'll stop, I'm sorry, is under illness and contact tracing. It says, subject to the provisions of the back to school plan, the superintendent may establish protocols, and I want to change that to will establish protocols for tracking students.
All right, sounds good. Andy, how about you?
That's fine. Yeah, I think Jennifer covered sort of the detailed points, and then I had the overall point that we should not be tied to the governor.
All right. Casey,
Jennifer, sorry. Yeah, Jennifer, could you just read again who's responsible for establishing procedures for contact tracing?
According to this document, subject to the provisions of the back to school plan, the superintendent will establish protocols for tracking student contacts as a means of locating others from whom students may contract or expose other persons to, it says to the COVID-19, maybe we could just make it to COVID-19. Such protocols will be consistent with law and regulation and be consistent with standards to protect the privacy of students, their families, and other persons.
Okay, so this is more about student contact information and not contact tracing protocols.
I think it is
Because I think,
contact tracing, because I think that even though some of that might come from DPH, I think that what it's
yeah,
referring to is that we, like the idea of like a seating plan, like we need to know, there's got to be some protocol, for like, how are we going to figure out if a student or a staff or anyone, right, in a building contracts COVID-19, how would we determine contact tracing? There's got to be a set of protocols for, we may, like, for example, it could be, this is not my area, but just seating plans, required seating plans, so we could track who's within a certain distance. It could be, for me, I think part of the protocol is, and this is something I brought up at school committee, at what point do we notify other members of other students, other family members of that classroom community if someone tests? That's different. I think actually it was Dave Gayshak who brought this up, and I was like, oh, this is really good. Delineates the official contact tracing that is dictated by DPH versus notifying other kids in the class or their families that someone has contracted COVID, not by name, but just someone in the class, sort of like we do with strep or lice or anything else. We can still choose as a district to notify families, not as part of the official contact tracing, but as a heads up so that families would know. I mean, and that's something we could discuss, David. I mean, that's part of MASC's recommendation, is that we include this language. And I just wanted to change it from may establish to will establish. I'm sure that the superintendent intends to do this anyways, but I just want to.
yeah, I just didn't want to tie our nurses to do something that we would actually rely on the town's public health department to do. And I think, Tricia, it looks like you want to add something.
Yeah, so the nurses will definitely be working with the health department doing the contact tracing. If the health department finds out first and they contact us, we are the ones that will go in and look at that seating chart. We hope to have seating charts in the elementary schools ahead of time anyway, and kind of determine who the close contacts are in conjunction with the parent, possibly the teacher. And I spoke to Jim about this last week, that we have to let the people who are direct contacts know. We would let the class know, and Jim felt that we would also let the school know, just in terms of transparency, maintaining confidentiality. The less that we can give, the better, but we would share that information.
Has the definition of a close contact been kind of finalized at this point?
Well, DESE describes it as within 6 feet for 15 minutes. I think they say 10 to 15 minutes. It's pretty well defined.
And so that's what determines contact tracing. And
correct.
Then Jennifer, you're also suggesting we should have a much broader definition of the way to define the people who need to be notified.
Right. So that's different than contract. This is the way it was put to me, because I've been pushing. I feel like I've been advocating that we need that is not satisfactory to me. I think that families would expect to be informed if a student in the class contracted COVID-19. I think families who are sending their kids into school would expect to be notified, at least that someone in the class. And it may be the language of the letter that goes home says, you'll be notified if you are a close contact. This is just informing you. And so to differentiate between the difference of like, you now have to quarantine versus keep it, heads up, kind of, you do what's best for your family, or just for you to be advised. I just think in the vein of transparency, I think it's a really good idea for us to be notifying people. And if we're not going to do that, I just think we also need to be transparent and notify families that that's not going to happen. So that they can, just go into it. It sounds like people are on board with that, and that's great. But
yeah, so maybe we should write that into this paragraph. I mean, just to distinguish between contact tracing and notification, and that the superintendent needs to establish protocols for notification as well.
Oh, I like that.
Right.
That would be great. I mean, it sounds like the work is, I'm very glad to hear that it sounds like it's already underway, but I would like to codify it. I feel very strongly about it.
I support
with the caveat that we maintain confidentiality always.
And that's in part of the policy. It does say that right here, that it will be consistent with law and regulation, consistent with standards to protect the privacy of students, their families, and other persons. So definitely confidentiality is very important.
And to Jennifer's earlier point, that by will establish protocols doesn't say what those precise protocols are, just that they will exist. There will be a system in place. Families will know. There will be tracing. There will be notification. The precise mechanism by which that happens would still be up to the discretion of the administration. Okay, so is that it for this policy? Does anyone else have any comments that they would like to make? Are there any members of the public who are watching who would like to state an opinion on this policy?
I think they have to put their hand up if they are interested in the participant. If they go to their participants, I think they can choose to raise their hand, perhaps.
All right, I'm not seeing any hands up, but if someone wants to comment later, that's fine. So we'll now move on to the policy on remote learning. Andy, any thoughts while you were going over it?
No, there was nothing here that struck me as needing further revision.
Jennifer?
Okay, so on the first page, the 4th bullet down on the first page, it says that maybe this is minor to folks, but ensure instruction and services are delivered by district educators and personnel as much as practicable. I don't know. I wanted to change as much as to as soon as possible. Is that language problematic for anyone?
So I actually prefer the current language to that. And the reason I'll say that is there are a lot of potential scenarios where it might not be practicable for district personnel to be utilized for something. So I don't think the issue is so much as soon as possible. It's more of an as much as possible or as much as it makes sense to do so under the circumstances. But I could envision situations where we might not want to force a certain fit between district personnel and the needs of a particular child. So I don't want to hamstring us in that regard.
Okay, that sounds reasonable. The next bullet point, I'm just trying to figure out what the value add is to this bullet point. And I'm also wondering if it's much different than the bullet point that follows it. So I'm talking about 1, 2, 3, 4. Bullet points 5 and 6. At one point I was like, I'm trying to figure out how exactly they're delineated as different from each other. And in any case, so I would put utilize the most effective tools and resources to deliver content. I just felt like we needed some more language about content in here. Okay. Available for students and faculty, including the skills and talents of district personnel in the delivery of instruction and services. And then I took out the end there, sharing resources as needed while share. I didn't understand why. I was trying to figure out what are we trying to say with these 2 bullet points?
I just wanted to ask again, where do you recommend putting the to deliver content? So that would be after effective
resources, I think.
So tools and resources available to deliver content, and then the rest of it?
Yeah, I think actually I would put it in front of available because I think it's the tools and the resources that that we would use to deliver content. Okay. And it's whatever that we have available for students and faculty, including the skills and talents of our district personnel in the delivery of instruction and services. And then I wasn't sure why and while sharing resources as needed, or rather share resources as needed. I mean, we can keep sharing resources is good. I like that. I wasn't sure. Started getting wordy on me and I was trying to reduce. And then, so I guess the question is, how is the next bullet, provide resources and services to meet the needs and circumstances of all students, different than the bullet point that we just talked about?
Well, if we're adding the to deliver content to the prior bullet point, then I think that would be the difference, because there are other needs and circumstances of students that do not pertain directly to the delivery of content.
Okay, that sounds, if we're gonna put in the content piece, I'm fine with leaving it as it is.
Okay.
I think I just have one more piece on the, it goes on to the next page. It's actually like the second sub-bullet point. Oh no, I'm sorry. The first bullet point, I wanted to see how people felt about, before the word curricula, adding in the word district curricula.
What if there isn't district curricula?
What other curricula do we have that's not district curricula?
Teacher chosen?
But that's still the stuff that the district, I guess I was trying to delineate, I hear you. I was trying to delineate between the district and the state and retaining the control of the district. So I wasn't trying to say like district mandated, like versus someone choosing it, but the curricula used by the district versus like TECA or some other thing. Does that make sense?
Got it. Okay. Yeah, totally. I could just see a teacher potentially saying,
Okay,
well, there isn't one, you know.
Okay. So maybe we just leave it. Maybe it's not worth, I'm not trying to create a division there where there isn't one. It doesn't
Or
need
can we say deliver content instead of deliver the curricula?
It's the same thing to me. I mean, it's okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't mind. Okay.
I mean, this is another one of those bullet points like the ones you flagged earlier where, well, duh. I mean, of course we do that, right? Like, so,
I guess we have to lay it on paper. Good to have it on paper, you know. So I'm going to skip I have two other comments. One is very small. So David, on the third sub-bullet point there where it talks about specific accommodations and it says clients, could we change that to students? Unless there's a reason that it needs to say clients.
Is that on the second page?
Yeah, it's on the second page, the third sub-bullet, like the empty bullets. It says specific accommodations for students at high risk, including clients of special education, and I just wanted to change it to students. Unless, is there some reason we need to say clients, Casey? Okay, so I don't know why it's in there. So if we could just change that to students. My last question is about the second, right above this one, the second bullet point there, or sub-bullet point, equitable access to appropriate content for all students. And I think the word equitable has really been challenging. And I'll tell you what my concern is. Like, I'm all for equity, but my concern about equity is that in some ways I'm concerned that I just want to make sure that our language does not reduce students' access to curriculum. And I'll let you know, and I don't know what our RLA schedule or calendar is going to be, but there is a possibility that in that model, you could deliver instruction across 5 days, academic instruction across 5 days that you can't or may not be able to do in a hybrid model. And so I want to make sure that we're ensuring that that remote learning gives everyone access to the full year of learning. And I just worry, and this is a bigger problem, and the ship may have sailed on this, but the difference between the hybrid and the remote, like in the remote model, you may actually be able to get, I don't know. I just want to make sure that kids are getting as much of a full year of learning as possible. And so I'm just worried about how our schedules are going to reduce that academic time. I don't know. I'm not sure that so when I saw equitable, I just wanted to see what people were thinking about what that word means to them in this bullet.
What's the specific kind of absurdity or damage that you are worried about from having that word there?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure that I've spent some time writing notes last night trying to like be succinct, and I'm not sure that I can be. I'm not sure that I can.
Well, just to give an example, Andy, so I think it was in Baltimore, but I could be wrong, but there was a school district that decided not to provide remote education right away because a lot of students didn't have reliable internet connections. And so the thought was it would be inequitable. You'd be favoring families of more privileged backgrounds to provide remote education in a way that only those who can afford internet would have access to it while others would not. So as a result, in the beginning at least, they just didn't do it. So I think Jennifer's point, which I share, is that we don't want the word equity to be used to actually limit what could be accessed by students. Of course, we want to be mindful about these economic issues. I'm just using that for purposes of illustration. But there are times where that word gets used more to constrain people who might otherwise be able to have greater access than others.
I
So I
noticed,
think
David, that you removed the word equitably earlier in this document. Maybe you had a similar thing in mind there.
Yes, I guess I just missed it the second time around, but that's why I removed it the first time. I was worried about that issue.
Okay.
So I think we could remove it here as well.
Okay, that's all my comments. I'm sorry, I feel like I'm taking up a lot of space, airtime, so I apologize.
All right, Casey or, I've got two people listed as Casey. Maria, you're under Casey as well, but Casey, Maria, anyone else? Tricia, have comments on this policy?
No, I think Jennifer covered it all.
Okay, well then seeing that, we can move on to the next one, which I believe is immunizations. So this one's nice and short. Andy, do you have any edits?
I'm just wondering, immunization as against diseases as may be specified by the DPH. Again, like what I was saying about the governor, do we want to tie ourselves to DPH? Like, do we have the authority to go beyond? Like, if we wanted to require a flu shot or a COVID vaccine when that became available, without necessarily waiting for the DPH to act, can we take that power by writing the policy differently?
Not sure on that. Does someone have an answer?
I don't know if we can do that. Tricia, do you know?
I don't think we can. That's never been asked. I think that the state requirements are fairly strict and pretty well laid out. So I don't personally see the need. I know that this year the flu immunization is one that is required by the end of December. So that was added.
All right. I'm thinking maybe if there's a COVID vaccine and then, the state might not wish to require it for all students, right? Or it might offer exemptions that Brookline might disagree with. And then is there any way for us to go beyond?
I don't know if we can do.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't see the need for it at
to
this
get
point.
legal counsel to opine on that. David, is this an update to an existing policy or is this a new policy?
This is a new one.
Okay.
All right, so you can ask town council about making it more restrictive, so beyond Department of Public Health. I personally would be a bit concerned about school committee or the school department wading into scientific determinations, but we do have our own Department of Public Health or Health Commission, so we might want to try to find a way to broaden it somewhat. So it's at least worth finding out what we're able to do.
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested to know what the actual answer is, but I'm not sure that I'm in favor of actually putting that into the policy. I mean, I'm not sure entirely how I feel about mandating the flu vaccine. I think I understand the reason why, but anyways, so it is what it is, and that is the law. But if we're talking about expanding outside of that, I'm hesitant to do that. The only comment I have on the policy, David, is that I think that we need to add in the first line, beep kindergarten, and I think we have to add first grade because kindergarten is not required. So for some students, their first year of entry in PSB might be first grade, if I'm not mistaken. If I understand the law correctly, I believe beep and K are actually optional, so they may enter in first grade or transfer from another district. And that was my only comment on that policy.
All right, I'll add that. Anyone else have comments on this policy? Do any members of the public want to speak on this one, or I'm sorry, the previous one, I should have asked? If so, please raise your hand or mention it in the chat room. If not, you'll get another chance at the end. All right, I'm not seeing any.
David, this is Erin. I just looked up the minimum, like the age requirement, in terms of wondering if kindergarten is required or not. And it says, I can send the link, but it says mandatory minimum age for school attendance is 6. So I guess it depends on when your birthday is, right?
Yeah, I think that the only requirement is that schools have to offer at least a half-day kindergarten, but I don't know if attendance is mandatory. I guess it depends on, like you said, Erin, the date of the.
Yeah.
But then beyond that, would a 6-year-old then have to start kindergarten, or would the 6-year-old go straight to first grade?
It doesn't, yeah, it doesn't necessarily specify.
Okay. All right, so next up will be the policy on face coverings. Jennifer, any thoughts on this one? Probably do. Oh, that's a good thing. Very helpful.
I spent my Labor Day writing up detailed notes on every policy that we were to be prepared. I really appreciated that we had them in advance, and I wanted, we should be prepared. We talked about it in our meeting. So anyways, I actually have I have a couple of notes, but I have one overarching thing that I understand that this could be part of the protocol, but I'm going to open it up for conversation about whether or not it should actually, in fact, be part of the policy. But my question is, what constitutes a face covering? So there's some research on what that is, and which are more effective and which are possibly neutral, and what actually is worse than not having a mask on at all. So the question, I think, really be between a mask that loops over the ear versus a gaiter that doesn't. And gaiters, there's been a lot of discussion in the news about their efficacy in actually helping to do what it is we're trying to do, which is reduce transmission. So I would be in favor of adding language into the actual policy that specifies that, because I'm not sure that lies just in protocol. Protocol might be when you have to wear it, who has to wear it, how do you wear it. But what is actually the policy, to me, feels a little bit different in that. I did also want to, so that's my sort of overarching piece, and then I have some specific details.
Okay. Is there a particular grade of mask that you suggest that we would include in the language? Do you want it to that degree of specificity? So there's the second paragraph, a face covering that completely covers the nose and mouth must be worn by all individuals in school buildings, on school grounds, and on school transportation, even when social distancing is observed. So perhaps there, would you want us to elaborate in more detail of what types of face masks we would deem minimally sufficient? So something like an N95 or?
I mean, I think we can't do that, but I think any sort of mask that loops over the ears, or I'm just trying to think, or fastens in some way that I mean, I think my biggest concern is the gaiters, specifically because they're sort of like, I've read some research that, and maybe Tricia can correct me if I'm misunderstanding it. I'm not a health professional. I'm not a medical professional. That there are some gaiters, like fleece gaiters, that are designed to be breathable, and so they actually let through more particles than it actually breaks large particles into smaller particles through the fabric. And so you're actually disseminating more particles than if you didn't have a mask on, because you would say, for example, a droplet was large and heavy, it would fall to the ground. So this is my limited research that I've done on different kinds of masks, and I just think that I would want us to be specific, that it should be a mask that covers, and so I don't know, Tricia, maybe you have language that you think would be more appropriate for this, or maybe you agree with me.
Yeah, I'm a little bit conflicted. I think we want a mask that covers the nose and mouth, and I would be probably less prescriptive, because things will change. Data changes. The quality of different types of masks is going to improve. And gaiters, a lot of what people don't like about them is people move and fidget with them a lot. So there's a lot of manipulation. So you're touching your mask, you're touching other things. So you're not having the hygiene that we're hoping for. I've heard some gaiters, newer quality gaiters, different materials are actually, some of the quality is not so bad. So it's a constantly changing thing. So I think if we get too wrapped up in describing exactly what we can have, I think we want to be current. We want to stay with current advice on that. Definitely not an N95. We want to save those for hospitals where they're needed, but covering the nose and mouth and worn properly, cleaned, those kind of things is where I would spend my time.
All right, any other thoughts? Anyone, Andy?
Yeah, I had two questions. The first, so as it's written, it means that even if you're alone in the room, you still have to be wearing a mask. I just wanted to be sure that that's the intention here. Like if you're sitting alone in your classroom, you still have to be masked?
I would say that would not be necessary with some personal level of comfort and responsibility.
And I feel like if a teacher is teaching remotely from their classroom, you know, and there are no students in the room, there's really no reason to make them wear a mask for that. Whereas the policy as written seems to require that. Like as soon as you're on school grounds, you got to have a mask on all the time.
Well, I think I would feel like that's okay to keep it that way until someone if you are alone in a room. I mean, I think if we want to put in language like that, because while they're traveling to their room, they should have a mask on. And when they get there and they're alone in and the door is closed and they're in their own like biosphere, right? Then I think that's fine.
So maybe we can add it as a bullet point to the list of exceptions, you know, like while eating or drinking, while outside, during certain phys ed, and when you're alone.
Even there, I would want to require that a window's open or something like that, because if someone's coughing all over the place and then other people come in the room and that person has maybe contaminated that room for other people, even if he or she were alone at the time.
We're hoping if they're coughing all over the place, they're doing it in their own home.
They're not, they shouldn't be at school.
That's a good point.
I mean,
So
maybe
David, your intention was to have this written so that the mask has to be on even if you're alone.
Well, yes and no. I think that it's fine as long as there's adequate air filtration. But I do worry about someone who's coughing or sneezing without taking the adequate precautions. And we can't totally control if someone will stay home. I think there will be situations where someone has allergies and feels that he or she is otherwise fine, sneezes while alone and someone else comes in. I think there's some risk there. But at the same time, I understand that if someone's going to be alone in a classroom all day, wearing the mask seems a bit like overkill.
then perhaps we don't put it under the exceptions. Maybe it's a separate line that just sort of maybe even delineates when educators are alone in a room with proper ventilation, you know, a mask is not required. Something that's very specific to the situation that we're anticipating. And I just wanted to make note that I really appreciated that the current policy says that masks are required even when social distancing is observed, and I feel very strongly we should keep that in. I think that's really important. I'm still not sold on I'm still not sure about the mask versus gaiter thing and not being delineated in the policy. I'm listening to Tricia and I'm trying to be reflective, but I know that maybe some of the new ones coming out might be acceptable, but most of what's out there right now doesn't fall into that category. And I know we want to be flexible, and that's the danger of policy versus procedure, but I just...
Right, so in our procedure, we're asking people not to wear gaiters and not to do a vented mask, but I don't know if you want that in policy if...
I mean, my other
All
concern is
working,
gators and bandanas. Like those to me are not what we're hoping. In order, if we're going to keep schools open, if we're going to open them and keep them open, I think that we really need actual masks, whether they're, the medical surgical kind of mask or cloth mask. I just think that if we, the gators and bandanas, I think kids might even be more interested in wearing those. I just don't think that they've been proven to be as safe. So I'm sort of still stuck there. I guess I'm okay if it's in a procedure, if it's really going to be in there, but policy is my only way to make sure, like have an input for that. I don't have any right to deal with protocol. So I guess that's why I'm stuck here. Okay, so we can come back. I have one other comment, David. There's let's see, the 1, 2, I guess it might be the 7th paragraph down. It starts with exceptions to this policy.
Yes.
I'm wondering if that paragraph should just be moved above the paragraph above it. Because the paragraph that starts in addition talks about when they're not required. I don't know, for me, that just, those 2 paragraphs went together. I don't know if maybe it doesn't really matter. I did want to edit that exceptions paragraph to say face shields, or the last paragraph says face shields or physical barriers may provide an alternative. And I just wanted to insert the word to masks in some instances. I don't want, and I think we should add on dependent on approval of principal, because it's not, I don't think that we're saying face masks are an alternative for most students, that it would be an accommodation. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Like, I don't want people to interpret this as like, oh, instead of a mask, I can wear a face shield, because that's not what it's intended to be. So I just want us to be really specific that face shields may be an alternative to masks in some instances, depending on they would need to get the approval of principal.
I'm not even sure if it's, is it a physician input? We can't require, I don't think we have to require physician input, but maybe.
Well, no, it says that in here. It does say it as part of the MASC language. In addition, if anyone is requiring, if anybody is requesting to not wear a mask for any number of reasons, medical, behavioral, or other challenges, that a written note from a physician is required prior to approval of a requested exemption. So they would need some documentation according to this policy if they want an exemption for the mask policy. And that parents cannot just excuse their child by signing a waiver.
Do we want to require a physician sign off or physician input?
I do, but do other people feel differently?
I agree with you, Jennifer. I think it's important to have a physician sign off on an accommodation or some kind of substitute. Because otherwise, I think that too many people are just not going to wear a mask, and that could.
I think we need to keep the other kids as safe as we can. One of the best ways to do that is to wear masks. And so, I mean, I understand that there will be students for whom that is not possible, but I think there needs to be some documentation that it's not just an individual decision, that there's.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm just thinking of some families who I know don't have as easy access to their medical providers as maybe other families do. But maybe that's an issue of getting some type of community support instead. Like, I'm struggling with whether or not it is the school district's responsibility to ensure that the family has access to their doctor. Because what we're saying is, if you don't have a doctor's note excusing you from a mask, you can't come to school. Your child can't come to school, right? It feels harsh to me if I am in a tough spot already, and now I have to, wait for my doctor to call me back.
I think there has to be some discretion, certainly between the the nurse at the school and the principal, some discretion has to be, it always is in play. But the requirement that they are wearing masks, or, you know, we do some education and work with students, and if that doesn't work, can they be in school? Probably not. Unless there's a medical reason that they can't wear a mask.
And I think that's sort of the language of this policy does talk about, there was some nice language. If an exception is, if students are in violation of the policy, the building principal consults with the parent or guardian to determine whether an exception is appropriate. If an exception is not appropriate, the student cannot, I mean, the language goes on, and it's, the short form is they can't attend school. They need to, and I think that's for the health and safety of all the students in the building.
Right.
We need to have, I think it needs to be clear that the expectation is compliance with the mask policy. And if people need, and I think this is something we probably need to send out to parents to give them time before entering into school so that they don't feel rushed. I understand that it could be stressful for some families to access that. And so I don't know if there are town resources that we could refer people to where they could get access to, you know, someone who could help them get it, to get an exemption if they need it, that, you know, there's some sort of supports in place, and that we give parents enough time to secure that before they would need to come to school. I just think it's important that there's language that says, like, it can't just be a personal choice. It needs to be something that's medical or behavioral or some combination of issues that students have that will keep them from being able to, it keeps them safe and healthy and others. And I know there will be exceptions. I feel like there should be a documentation that it's, I don't know. So yeah, I do feel like there needs to be something. I do think that that's contingent on us getting the information out to families and also providing them with some community supports to access, you know, the documentation that they need. I don't know what that is. I don't know what those supports are, but that would be my recommendation.
And just to expand a little bit more on that, because you mentioned the medical, behavioral, and I just want to expand on like the mental health side of it. So who would we allow to write this, you know, this note basically saying that the person has a condition? Would that include, you know, a licensed mental health counselor or a licensed social worker? If the,
to me, if there's yes, I mean, to me, that's like any medical professional in any area of health. I mean, to me, that could be, but.
So for me,
because there are also master's level clinicians. So that's why I just wanted to throw that out there.
Do you think, are you saying that you think that those folks should or should not be able to do that? Are you opining on that?
I think it's just a discussion to be had. Like when we're talking about who it, or
I personally think we would want it to be an MD, an RN. I think someone whose focus is sort of medical health, because we're worried about people catching a contagious virus. And yes, mental health is very important. I'm not minimizing it. But someone having a behavioral issue, someone who's working with them like a social worker might not have the full medical knowledge in terms of what's effective or who should be using a mask or not. I think that's a separate issue. And so probably a doctor and a nurse should be making that determination in consultation with the mental health professional. But I wouldn't leave it to a social worker alone, for instance.
So I'm going to push back a little bit on that, because from, you know, from a mental health perspective, we want to treat our mental health conditions just as seriously as we do our medical conditions. And it's not that, and it's really the reason why they aren't able to wear the mask. So if they have, you know, a mental, if they're, let's see, and I just lost it, I'm so sorry. Claustrophobic, let's just say claustrophobic, right? Where they're have really a lot of anxiety and stress around being confined, having things, you know, constricting them in any way. This really could send them having to wear something that's constricting them or covering them could send them into a mental health. So from that perspective, if they're working with a licensed mental health counselor or a licensed social worker, that is, you know, a professionally licensed person that has been trained and is recognized above like a master's level clinician, or so that's why I want to be a little more specific in who we would allow, because I really feel like the mental health is also just as equally as important as the medical piece, and it's really the why they can't wear the mask, not so much the medical behind it. It's just why they're not able to put face covering on.
So my question though, I hear you and I understand, Maria. Just in that situation, using that example, I think that same student would probably have a hard time with a face shield as well. And so are we saying that they will not be required to wear anything in school? And so is that, I guess I'm looking for some guidance, how do we pair that with the idea that we're trying to keep people safe? Like, I'm just trying to figure out how do we balance the needs of all of our students. And so some students will struggle with the mask or the face covering, and other students need to be protected from the aerosols that we're all breathing. So how do we provide education and make sure that we can meet the needs? Like, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I mean, what do people think? Do people have thoughts about this? Because that is concerning, because then that person who can't wear the mask is then possibly exposing other folks. And so we're not able to keep the other folks safe in the building, or, at least trying to minimize that risk. So how do we handle that? Have you all talked about what the procedures would look like? If we're talking about the policy side and you all are thinking about like the actual implication, what are your thoughts about that? How would you manage that?
I think that's probably one of the more challenging questions. So you have a student so legitimately can't wear a mask. Whoever agrees with the student and the parent can't wear a mask. And what does that mean for other people in the classroom? Teacher can wear a mask and a face shield, which we'd recommend in settings where the teacher could be in contact with secretions. And what about, so could the student who can't wear a mask maybe could wear a face shield? That's one option. It's at least some kind of barrier. Really ensuring that 6 foot, that people are really carefully respecting that. But what are the other ramifications? Do all the other students wear a face shield? That seems like a lot. I don't even know why. I was going to say, I don't even know why. I don't know if I want to bring this up, but what do we do with students who don't get immunizations, right? They are putting some of our other students at risk. So what do we do in that situation?
I think that's a fair analogy, and that's a concern that people have. I mean, that is a concern. I'm not professing to have the answers here. These are questions that I had when I was reading the policy, and I don't know.
Well, one of the things I think is the immunization idea is a good way to think about it. A student without immunization can come to school until there should be an outbreak, and then that student has to stay home until the outbreak is over. So in this case, if there's a student who can't wear a mask, legitimately can't, that's fine as long as all the other safety mechanisms, mitigation factors are in line. If that student happens to be a student who can't control secretions and has other behaviors in which he or she is putting classmates at risk, it might be a time where that student can't be at school. I think it will have to be a case-by-case situation. If a student can't wear a mask, maybe wears a face shield. We try other strategies. We try other mitigations to be sure that everybody is safe. And if they don't work, maybe that student can't be at school.
Well, I don't think we're going to resolve this tonight. I don't think, David, unless you think we're going to come to some.
Well, we do need to have some kind of face mask policy in place for the start of the school year. I think that's important. So the question before us was more specifically around who can provide the exemptions, who can provide the letters. Is it just going to be a doctor? Can it also be a social worker, other clinicians?
I would agree with Maria that in this case, a mental health professional ought to qualify, just because those are the grounds often on which somebody ought to be exempted.
Okay.
I mean, I agree. I mean, I think that we really need to think about the mental health needs of our students. I think it's important. Maybe we want to delineate exactly, maybe we do or do not want to delineate at what level of clinician. Maria, do you have a recommendation for us about what you think would be a reasonable level of expertise in order to make a decision? I mean, I do want to say, I do understand David's point about there are medical implications of the decision that a mental health worker might make for students. Say, oh, I understand that this causes a lot of anxiety, or whatever the issue is, that they're not able to wear a face mask because it's causing issues for the child. But there are medical implications of that then occur. And so at what level would someone be able to sort of, I don't know, what would your recommendation be?
I think an independently licensed mental health professional, either an LMHC or an LICSW.
So can we add that language, David? Is that something that's a licensed social worker, or what was the first one you said, Maria?
Licensed mental health counselor.
So that's
licensed mental health counselor, LMHC.
Okay, so those are folks who do they take like boards or something? Like they've been independently licensed by a national organization. How do you feel about that, David?
Yes.
Maria, is an LMHC, does that cover an LICSW?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, I guess we could add it.
With social work, oh, I'm sorry, David. With social work, there are several levels of licensing. And the LICSW is that independent licensure. So they have, they have more ability to diagnose, things like that. So similarly with the LMHC, that is the top level for a mental health counselor who becomes independently licensed.
So this is a different category of professional than a psychologist or a psychiatrist. This is a different group of people.
Right, it's a social worker who has a graduate degree.
I think it's beyond a graduate degree.
It's beyond, correct.
Yep, it's an advanced graduate degree to get so you have folks who graduate with an MSW who I think they sit for their boards and they qualify for an LCSW, a licensed clinical social worker, I think it is. And then to get your independent license to be an LICSW, you have to do X number of hours under the supervision of someone with an independent license.
So it's kind of equivalent to having an MD if you're a medical doctor? Or?
I think it's probably the equivalent of being an RN and an NP.
Okay, so then when we say physician, we're not talking about RNs in that case, right? We're talking about MDs. So is there anything on the mental health side that's more the equivalent?
What if we say healthcare provider, which leaves it a little more vague?
I think what Maria had covers it, which is the LMHC, the licensed mental health counselor. Is that the C?
Is there a reason, Maria, that we wouldn't say a psychologist or psychiatrist specifically?
Oh, we could absolutely say that. I'm just talking from a mental health counseling perspective. Who else we would allow to provide that documentation? Right, those folks are able to diagnose. So when we think about, working independently, through health insurance, and things like that, they are able to make a diagnosis where, lower level clinicians there are more restrictions from them. They have to have a lot of different kinds of supervision, things like that. So I think it's important to make, if we're going to include mental health counseling as some of the professionals who are able to provide this documentation, then we want to really specify what type of mental health professional, what credential they have.
Is it not, so I guess what I'm trying to wrap my head around is, wouldn't those folks still be able to get the exemption from their physician? They wouldn't need to go and get that. They could still, if it's for a mental health need, they could still get the exemption from a physician. They don't.
Yes, I'm just thinking of access. So typically they will meet with their clinician on a regular basis, where they might not see their PCP for a year, right? Or they might not have one that they use regularly, but they will see their mental health clinician. So that I'm just thinking of access and ability to, get that documentation.
David, where are you at?
I'm a little uncomfortable with it because of the medical implications. I ultimately would want an MD signing off on issues that are of such significant import beyond that student, but also for sort of everyone. And it's not to minimize mental health issues at all, but I would just want it to be a decision that's made in consultation, where the mental health professional is explaining the issue with which he or she is familiar from all that exposure with the student, and then sort of runs it by the MD for the medical implication component, and then they reach a recommendation. Because I'm just a little concerned that there's the potential of people trying to take advantage of this.
And I agree with you, and that's why I say that it should have that higher level credential versus a bachelor's level or even a master's level clinician being able to provide that. So I agree with you completely.
Andy, where are you on this?
I mean, I see both sides. I don't understand the credentialing system on the mental health side. And I'm just taking Maria's word for it that, the level of training that this requires. I'm still thinking in terms of trying to match it to MD, which I think we're saying it doesn't quite.
This is a tough call.
Yeah.
I mean, because I want to be respectful of those needs, although, and I guess it's because I know some folks who are needing to go through this process, and even though they see mental health workers, they're still going through their physician to get their sign off. I don't know. I'd be interested in the public comment on it to see if people really think it would be challenging to get the sign off from their doctor. Because we're asking them to wear it for medical reasons. So I see where I understand, David, where you're going. I do want to make it's hard. I want us to set up parameters that are accessible to people, but also don't let people take advantage of the system. And I don't know where we strike that balance. And I think that's the balance we need to find. And I'm just not sure which way we go. I mean, I guess the other thing is we could always revisit it, David. If we say that we're going to allow these independently licensed people also to sign off on it, and things seem like they're getting out, like the numbers just aren't what we intend to happen isn't what's actually happening, then maybe we revise the policy.
I think given the stakes involved here, it would be better to get it right first time around. Yeah.
The stakes are high. I think the stakes are high. So which is the right way?
I think one way we could maybe split the difference is say that it needs to be an MD. However, the nursing staff or the principal or someone in the school department can waive that requirement based upon other evidence provided by healthcare providers.
I think I would only be, I see where you're going with that, but I think that then the backup should be these licensed, independently licensed folks, and not just that I'm going to have a conversation with the principal and try to convince them that this is the right thing to do and hope that they're going to allow me this waiver. I think it's got to come from somebody. So I think if it's through the physician, you know, and I don't know, maybe it's some wording if access is an issue in consultation with the nursing staff, you know, whatever, medical notes from, and then we could list the independent, those lovely acronyms that Maria supplied for us. And we insert those specific individuals as the first go-to as a physician, and with the consultation of nursing staff and the principal, it could also be acceptable that one of these licenses provides the note.
Okay, I think that works.
Maria, how does that sound, Maria? Casey, Tricia, what do you think?
I think that's fine. I thought that I had read somewhere that Desi said not to ask for that, and I was trying to see that in writing. I guess we can't require it, we can request it, but can't require it, is what I think Desi or someone said, and I can't find that in writing, which is what I was trying to find while we were having this discussion. So in the absence of having it in front of me, I think we could say a physician's note and with nurse input or participation. I think we have to have some flexibility on this while still being really strict about it.
So this policy that, just so you know, Tricia, that came from MASC. So typically they vet a lot of this through whatever the current rules are. So, but if you find something that says something different, if you would forward it to us.
Yeah, I've been looking and I haven't found it, so it makes
if you
me
come
wonder.
across it, we have another meeting on Thursday, and then we have first reading, and so it's not up for a vote on Thursday. We have some time if this isn't the appropriate.
Okay.
But
First reading on Thursday means the full committee will get to discuss this, right?
yes.
Okay, so it would be good to hear from them.
Right, so
Before we
right.
leave this one, can I bring up another place where I think it's not clear what the policy envisions. So that paragraph that begins, if students are in violation, the building principal will consult with the parent and guardians to determine whether an exception is appropriate. So then that might take days or weeks, right? So now, as it's written now, the policy doesn't say what we do with the child during that period of consultation. I think the language as was handed down by MASC implied that like that child could be removed immediately pending the outcome of the consultation. And David, with your addition, if an exception is not appropriate, then it now reads as though, well, I don't know what it means. So it's in limbo until, that final determination is made. So before then, does the student get to stay or does he have to leave?
I think realistically, the student would have to leave, because if the argument is the student can't have a mask at all, can't wear a mask whatsoever, and then it's going to take a week or two to sort it out, that would be a week or two of exposure to the other students.
Okay, I think we just need to make that clear if that's the intent, because right now it isn't.
Does anybody have any, the only other thing while David's making notes that I had a question for is mask breaks. Are we envisioning that mask breaks will be an outdoor activity, or is the school department envisioning that the mask breaks would be an indoor activity? Does anybody have any insight on that?
I think principals are scheduling for both.
How does that work, Tricia? Just if everybody takes their mask break off inside a room. I don't understand how that's possible.
Well, if you're in a class, we would recommend that maybe half the class take their break at one time, or a third. Like if you're in rows, every other row would take their mask break, or The whole class would not be doing the mask break at the same time. Preferably outside if you're able to do that.
I just don't understand how we would say that students have to wear a mask and then you can take your mask off for a break inside the room with everybody else and not be outside. I don't know. I don't understand the mask breaks.
I agree with Jennifer. I think that would defeat the purpose of the general requirement of wearing masks indoors. I suppose if you're in a gym with excellent ventilation and your class only has 15 people in it and everyone's far apart, then maybe. But in the regular classroom, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
I was envisioning that as an outdoor only activity. So that's why I'm concerned. I don't know if that we need to like specify something in the policy, David. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to.
Well, David removed the mask breaks bullet point, right, from the list of exceptions.
Right. That's why I'm saying, so if that's not in the policy that you can take a mask break as an exception, that you can take your mask off, then you can't have a mask break inside.
That's what it implies, right? You can't have mask breaks
You can't have a
indoors.
mask break inside.
Yeah, right.
I don't know why we would want to. I just don't, then why are we having people wear masks at all? Because that could be in that 10 minutes that you're taking your mask break, that's when people get infected. I just don't understand.
Well, it'll be a,
breaks are important.
yeah, so I think the optimal thing would be to have a mask break outside, but if you can't be outside, if it's inclement weather, a lot of different reasons that you might not be outside, the thought is you can take a safe mask break, a couple of minutes. You're not a 15-minute break. It might be a 5-minute break. So don't want to go to that dark place if that's the 5 minutes. That's not 15 minutes of close contact. So, you know, some of these things are imperfect but practical and seems to be of limited risk.
Where do you stand on that, Andy?
I don't think he heard you, David.
No, I did. I just.
Okay, sorry.
No, I'm just not completely sure where I stand. I mean, personally, I find it intolerable not to take my mask off for like a couple minutes every hour, and I just don't see how students are going to manage without it. And I think it makes sense what Tricia is saying, that it is possible to do this in a staggered way that doesn't lead to a lot of exposure.
It also becomes really time consuming if you're doing like a row at a time like that. I don't know.
Also, I mean, people are going to be eating in the classrooms, right? That seems to be the plan. So, you know, like these mask breaks are, if we're going to do that, then these mask breaks are actually not a big deal, you know, compared to taking off your mask for 15 minutes while eating.
That's true.
Are we eating in the classrooms? Is that what's happening?
Some of the classes have to because they're using the cafeterias because of the 6-foot rule. Some cafeterias may be used for class space.
I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan of any of those. I'm not a fan of eating in the rooms. I'm not a fan of the indoor mask breaks, but I don't know. I don't know how it's going to be managed. I just think it undoes the point of the masks. All you need is 5 minutes. I don't know.
Well, but it's not 5 minutes. I mean, I think we really have to be clear. It's not all you need is 5 minutes. It's 15 minutes of close contact. So we can be afraid of 5 minutes. You might not like that, but that's not all you need. And so I don't want to let that go and make that seem like a real statement. 15 minutes of close contact is what is considered, within 6 feet is what is considered a close contact. We have to really respect that that's the best evidence we have right now. And if we are sitting 6 feet apart, everybody at least 6 feet apart, masks are on most of the day, a mask break outside if we can, but if we're sitting in the classroom and taking our masks off, these are children that we believe are low risk to begin with. They're not coming to school if sick. all the other mitigating factors are in place, if we believe all those things, and I do, that's where evidence has us, it isn't the 5 minutes that's going to get us.
So I hear you, but I would just sort of say, in your experience, do you find that students are never sent to school sick?
In my experience, that has not been the case. My experience also has not been living in a pandemic. The rules are very different. And this requires 100% full partnership, parents, faculty, and students. We have to be really strict on our end. Parents have to buy into that. The only way this is going to be successful is if everybody does their job and we hold people accountable. So no, it's not the way it's always been, but I think people are worried, and I am very hopeful. I'm an optimistic person by nature. I am hopeful that parents are going to do the right thing, staff are going to do the right thing, and we're going to work together. I really am.
Casey or Maria, do you want to opine on this one?
Well, I mean, I guess we can, I'm really interested in public comment. I hope that people will comment. I hope that people will let us know, you know, where they fall. And I'm interested to see our debate at full school committee about it.
Do any members of the public want to comment on this? If so, please raise your hand or mention it in the chat, which I think has been enabled for you. Not seeing any hands. Okay, our next item is an update from Maria about changes to Title IX and why we need to update some of our policies.
Okay, so I'm not sure how deeply you'd like me to get into Title IX, but you know, feel free to ask additional questions. Basically, the final rule, or Title IX, has been passed into law and became effective in August. The new law is very prescriptive. It's quite significantly different than what was in the past. It's very due process heavy. And it requires a lot of significant procedural requirements. So the other thing about the new regulations are prior to that, to it being implemented, really the focus was on higher education. And I think with the new regulations, they were very specific in including you know, K-12 schools. With that being said, K-12 schools don't have the resources and structures of higher education. So the requirements that it puts on schools is pretty onerous. So some of the other things that are pretty significant about the Title IX regulations are the new definitions that it doesn't stray from. It's very specific on what is considered harassment, and it also includes additional definitions for some of the other, let's see. There's some additional definitions of what falls under Title IX. So one of the concerns that we have as a school and others have communicated is the concern that all of these new regulations will decrease the amount of reporting or people being comfortable coming forward to report because the new regulations are also very due process heavy. There isn't really the ability for confidentiality. So there's a lot there with the new Title IX regulations. And then the other thing that we need to consider as well is our policy, and actually many policies around harassment in schools, put all of those like discrimination together. So it could be different kinds of discrimination, not just sexual discrimination. All of those are under one umbrella harassment policy. Now that Title IX is significantly different, are we able to continue to keep it one policy? And if we don't, that can also be confusing, because then we have multiple policies and procedures on harassment. That also can be challenging and confusing. So that definitely is another consideration that we have to think about when we're rewriting policy.
All right, thank you for that. Another question that I have is, how specific do you think we should be in our harassment policy around the procedures for due process, for instance?
So with Title IX, they are very specific. They lay out exactly what the procedures that they expect schools to comply with, and there's no straying from that. We can add to it, but what they've provided, we can't decrease from or stray from. So that is another significant factor. So again, when we talk about having one policy for harassment, that makes it difficult, because now are we going to include these procedures for the different types of harassment? Because as I mentioned, it's very onerous on the schools. It's one of the other things I didn't mention is it really takes away from the single investigator model. So in the past, it's very possible that a principal would get a report of harassment. They could investigate it. They could decide on that. They could issue a consequence on that. No more. So with Title IX, each person has their own role. So when the report is received, really the Title IX coordinator determines who the different folks who will be participating. So there is going to be an investigator. That investigator is going to do what they need to do to gather the information, and then they have to hand it off to the decision maker. So from there, the decision maker looks at all of the information. They also have to give time for both parties to look over all of the information, ask questions, and then there's an appeals coordinator. So all of these different roles are very taxing on schools just in general. So
would it be your recommendation, it sounds like, that we not apply these procedures to all the different types of harassment, but specific to the Title IX issues around sexual harassment?
For that reason, I would say yes. However, as I mentioned, I'm just concerned that it's going to make it confusing for people that you follow these procedures for this kind of harassment, and you have to do this for other types of harassment. That my concern is that it's going to make it confusing for people. Which form do I fill out? Who do I go to? For that consistency, it's important. We want to make the process come forward with a complaint very easy, all of that, but I also need to recognize that the Title IX the Title IX requirements are very onerous. So do we have the capacity to go through that model for all complaints?
What would you anticipate as the need for additional staffing if we were to use those Title IX requirements across the board as a complaint procedure?
So at the high school level, with respect to sexual harassment, we would typically see more reports just from a developmental perspective. We don't usually see a lot at the elementary schools, some at the middle school. So from a high school perspective, it's really, making sure staff are trained to fulfill any given role. So if there are multiple investigations occurring at any time, we would need somebody who is able to be an investigator in one role and possibly the decision maker in another investigation. But that being said, all of this is a significant amount of work. So my concern for you know, the folks, and usually it's administrators who are doing this, it really takes away from their typical, you know, jobs and duties that they have. So that's my other concern. So I don't know that I completely answered your question, except, you know, with respect to what does increased staffing look like, but it really is just recognizing that the amount of work that goes into any Title IX grievance that's filed.
Can I ask Maria, like in a typical year, you know, how many cases would be likely to fall under Title IX versus being some other form of harassment? I mean, the question here is whether to bring all those others in under the same procedures.
Right.
So are we talking, yeah.
Yeah, so you actually bring up a really interesting component, another component to Title IX, because the definition of what harassment is and when it occurs, where it occurs, also has a significant bearing on whether we move forward in a full investigation or not. So there are times where we might say, no, we're going to rule that this is not a Title IX you know, issue. But however, that doesn't mean that we're not going to address it with our code of conduct. So it's kind of challenging to say just to screen out Title IX alone, because there are a lot of incidents that we're still going to address. We're still going to investigate. We're still going to look at putting in safety and you know, discipline discipline to rectify that might not be Title IX initially.
Yes, what I'm asking is sort of the proportions here. Like, you know, if we bring in other forms of harassment and treat them under the same procedures, are we like doubling the workload, or are the overwhelming majority of these cases going to fall under Title IX anyway? And so you know, it's only on the margins that it makes a difference. Like, you know, how many cases are like race, you know, national origin, that sort of other things versus sex, like Title IX?
To be honest, I don't have those specific numbers for you. When we talk about harassment that's been filed by specific category. So I can't answer that question.
Mm-hmm.
That's something it's possible to get numbers for.
We could. There is, you know, there's reporting that we have to the state, but again, my only kind of concern is if we're not capturing the right number. As I mentioned, some things are going to initially come in as somebody might report a Title IX sexual harassment, but it might not, after initial you know, screening of it, it might be determined that it doesn't fall under that. So it wouldn't count as Title IX. However, it might count as something else. So that's why we can get some numbers for you, so that can be part of the you know, consideration when we talk about, does it make sense to have one policy, or does it make sense to have Title IX be its own specific policy?
In terms of the timing of implementing a policy, how pressing is this?
So we have the interim policy in place, which is again based exactly what the federal regulations say we must do. So that interim policy is in place. So we're able to look at that and add to it if we need to, or again, look at, do we want to change our one policy to carve out Title IX into its own separate policy?
Can you clarify? Sorry, David, I see you were going to speak. I'm just curious. You said we have an interim policy. Is that the one that we just got emailed that's dated August 14th, 2020?
Yes.
So, but we don't have, we didn't vote that policy, did we, David?
So this is a federal law. So
Right.
we're putting the federal, we're doing exactly what we need to do to comply with the law, basically. And then the policy piece is, do we want to expand on what the federal regulations provide us for Title IX? And also, do we want to carve out Title IX into its own policy? Right now, it's lumped into all together with different types of harassment.
So could you, so how does a policy become a policy without going through us, David? How does that work?
I think what Maria is saying is that because there was that law change, there was really no choice but to immediately be in compliance with the law. So therefore it has the interim tag, but it's subject to changes we will make. Because sometimes when laws change, there has to be immediate action and there's not time for the usual process. But that's one of the reasons why Maria brought it to my attention as a policy that we need to take up. So that's why we're beginning that today, and we'll continue with this a little bit on our Thursday meeting. But in terms of what we get approved, what we try to get approved by the full school committee right away, I would focus on the first 4 policies. So I think it's important for the community to know, entering the start of the school year on the 16th, what the policy will be on immunizations and on face masks and what to expect, at least broadly speaking, from remote learning and other COVID.
Maria, what do you recommend? You've gone through so many Title IX trainings in preparation to make sure that we are not only in compliance, but so folks know, Maria is also ensuring that we have administrators trained and that staff are educated on what the new requirements are. What would you recommend?
So I'm still doing a lot of research on the one policy model because again, my concern as you know, the coordinator for the district is I want to make sure that if someone comes forward to file a harassment complaint, that it's straightforward, it's easy, it's not confusing, it's not intimidating. So my concern is if we have multiple policies, it's going to be confusing if you look at the interim Title IX policy right now, ooh, it's quite substantial. I'm just trying to figure out a way, how can we make the you know, comply with all of the regulations, but at the same time, we want to make sure that people can come forward and easily file a complaint and feel heard, and also that we're making sure that we're addressing any situations that are causing our school and our school communities to, you know, not be the places that we want. So I'm still doing a lot of the research on how can we, do we have the ability to have one policy and balance all of the things that the regulations that we have, in addition to making sure that it's easy for folks to file a grievance.
All right, so we're up at around 10 o'clock. So does anyone have some final remarks on the Title IX changes, the 2 policy drafts that have been posted, one of which is the interim policy, another one of which encompasses some modifications that I made from a prior draft? Jennifer, I saw you wanted to say something.
Sorry, I just, I think it will be helpful to sort of understand where we're trying to go and what direction we're trying to go in. Are we trying to create a separate policy, or are we trying to amend or update our, our existing policy and sort of bring it up to code, and make any other changes that we think need to be made? I'm just trying to, I don't know if we should be trying to merge these documents, or are we trying to pull one document out from the other? So it's hard to know what to do next until we sort of have a decision about that. And I think, I'm wondering what questions do maybe subcommittee members have that staff could answer for us that would help us decide which way we need to go?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's the one I asked about how much, just what proportion of cases are likely to fall under Title IX anyway, so that if we broaden its application, the application of these procedures, how much more work are we creating? I mean, for our work, Jennifer, to your point, I think we may be needing to harmonize more than just the Title IX and the document that David created for us, right? There's also a bullying policy that's part of the policy manual, which I think overlaps with a lot of this stuff. And there may be other policies in the manual that, that also need to be harmonized that I'm just not thinking of at the moment. So perhaps we should start with by collating sort of everything that we actually need to harmonize, because I'm not even sure what that is. I think it goes beyond just the two documents that are in front of us right now.
All right, we do have a member of the public who is raising her hand, Ms. Donna Perry. So I have...
Hi, David. Hear me?
Yes, can hear you.
Hi, thanks so much. So the chat function is still disabled. So we can actually see you on the chat, like your comments, but we can't respond. Anyhow, thank you. I had a couple of things that I wanted to say specifically about some of the language that you guys are using in the context of this conversation. I think it's really important that we use accurate language, particularly because of some of what Jennifer has mentioned about, that line between policy and procedure and the role of the school committee. But the way that I understood it, and I may be wrong, is that Title IX is a law which requires schools to develop a policy. And I thought that the law was updated effective May 2020. So anything that we have updated, and Maria, I think you had sent an email out to the larger school community saying that the new policy went into effect August 14th, which I think is also, there's some confusion there, because if the law was updated in May, I'm not sure why there would be a lapse in when if in fact we were just repeating the policy, then the federally mandated policy, why we would just be repeating that with a lapse. So I think it's more accurate to say that Title IX is a law which required the schools to develop a policy. We have an existing policy. That policy is in our policy manual, which is up on our website, and that policy has not been updated. Whether or not an email was blasted out to people, like the existing policy still stands. And that may or may not be at odds with what you guys are reviewing now, and it may or may not be at odds with what was updated in Title IX back in May. The other thing I wanted to point out is that having reviewed this proposed policy, it does, based on like the policy conversations that I've followed over the past 3 or 4 years, it does seem to kind of fall more into the procedural space, like sort of like the differentiation between the bullying policy that we have and then the policy mandates that PSB develop a plan every, I can't remember if it's every year or every other year. So the language, I'm just circling back to the beginning, which is that I think that that is important that we use accurate language.
All right, thank you, Donna.
Thank you.
We also have, Maria, did you want to respond or?
Yeah. Can I just respond to a couple of those things? So I would absolutely agree that the interim policy and procedures is very heavy on procedures. I would agree with that. Some of the things that we need to consider, though, when we think about the policy side is things like the definitions for sexual harassment that we absolutely have to use. We can't, you know, we can add to them, you know, in our own policy, but from what we have currently in our, you know, harassment policy of the definition of sexual harassment, that does not comply with the new law. And then I just wanted to clarify the dates. So May is when they released the final rule. So the Department of Education released that and said, you know, this has become law now. However, you have until August 14th to become compliant. So that is the difference between the two dates. So it was released in May. They let everybody know about it, kind of digest it, understand it, and then also provided the second date of August 14th. You must be in compliance by that date.
And thank you so much, Maria. What was it that you needed to be in compliance with? Like, what did you actually have to produce? A supporting procedure or supporting policy?
So basically primarily the procedures, right? However, the policy piece is, as I mentioned, like the definitions of things, who are the different parties, all of the different terms that are included, all of that would be part of our policy. However, they're also part of the procedures. So when we needed to be in compliance, it dips a little bit into policy as well. So it's important to recognize that although this is very procedural heavy, there are some components that we have to include that dip into the creation of policy, which is things like the terms we absolutely must use and definitions and things like that.
So to that end, I will say again, and I think that the language we're using is really important, but to that end, I don't think that we're in compliance because our policy, which has been voted on and is entered into the Brookline Policy Manual, is still the former policy and hasn't been updated.
We're going to work on that policy now and update it, and that's why public input is also quite useful. So in that vein, we do have another member of the public who has a hand raised, Ms. Connie Clausen. Hi, are you on, Ms. Clausen? Go ahead.
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Two things. First, going back to the very relevant question of the subcommittee asking for numbers and data. I would like to point out that in the current policy on discrimination and sexual harassment, there is a requirement for the school administration to present an annual report to the school committee on the numbers of reports that they are receiving. So as a member of the public, it is really concerning to me that that data is not readily available, that people are saying, I don't know how many complaints are filed per year. But I think overall, I think what we need to really focus on is the fact that it's not necessarily policy or procedures, but the culture of our schools that is more deeply affected by this issue. And I think that the two, not that anybody can't be harassed or sexually harassed, but I think that the two groups that are the most vulnerable are students who are gender fluid and female students. And when reading through these procedures, I agree with Maria wholeheartedly that this is very procedure heavy and it's very intimidating. And I can't imagine being a 14-year-old girl who is afraid, or a 25-year-old non-tenured teacher who is being harassed and is afraid to come forward because it could threaten her job. Either one of those people following this process and going through all of these multiple steps. And I'm afraid that this will drive people away. I think that, you know, there's a lot of components to this, and a lot of it involves culture, and the procedures and the policy are a single step. I think there needs to be an infinite amount of more training at the school level on recognition of the girl, because no 14-year-old girl is going to come forward and say, hey, you know, I was sexually harassed. They're going to come forward with, I think something bad happened to me. What should I do? And what I am hearing from students in our schools over and over is that when they come forward with that type of reporting, the people that they're reporting it to, who are not complaint managers and principals, don't know what to do with that information. And I would really recommend that we start at that level of training people what to do with an initial report and how to recognize that a student is in trouble and to work it up the system from there. And I totally hear Maria when she says that there are legal requirements to this, and they're formidable. But I don't want this policy to be written to the point that vulnerable, very, very vulnerable people who are frightened away from it. I also really want to emphasize the confusing nature of this. And, you know, we are asking children to do this reporting and trying to make it as simple as possible and having things coordinate. So if the policy is titled harassment, but it's also meant to cover discrimination, then it needs to say that. Like, this language needs to be very, very clearly spelled out so that when our very adept internet savvy students are Google searching this, they come up with the right form and the right parameter. And the goal of all of this is to resolve the problem in the most efficient way that you can. So any missteps, any like wrong track where you fill out the wrong form, or you report to the wrong person, or somebody just declines to investigate, creates delays. Those delays impact the students because they feel like they're not being heard, right? And maybe that's not relevant, but to them, that's what's happening. And they're going to get frustrated. They're going to walk away. And there's a lot of mental health ramifications for this. So I just would really encourage the committee not to rush this, even though there are deadlines and there's legal ramifications to this, not to rush this, to really take a look at all of these policies as a whole and to try to come up with something that coordinates everything. And I realize what I'm asking in the current environment when you have so much other things to do, but to really come up with something that speaks to the culture of the schools that we want to create.
All right, thank you very much. Would anyone else like to respond to Ms. Clausen's comments? All right, well, we're 14 minutes beyond where we're supposed to go, but I'm always glad to accept public input. So thank you very much, Ms. Perry and Ms. Clausen. Does anyone else have parting thoughts on anything we've discussed today or on next steps forward? No? Okay. Well, our next meeting is going to be this Thursday before the full school committee meeting. It'll be from 4 to 5:30. It's going to be focused primarily on the first 4 policies that we discussed. So I took notes on the input that many of you provided. I'll implement those and try to get that out to everyone at some point tomorrow. And then we can have further discussions on this at our Thursday meeting. And if we feel that the policies are ready to refer to the full committee, then we'll also be discussing them at the full committee level. So that's the plan for the next couple days. Any questions? No? All right, so that concludes our meeting for tonight. Thank you everyone for participating. It's very much appreciated. Have a good night.